everyone, welcome back to 10-Minute-ish Science with your host, Alexandra.
Alan,
And Ray.
thanks for all the comments and questions on last week's earthquake podcast. Make sure to subscribe to stay up to date with your weekly favorite science trio. Today's podcast is sponsored by the University of Toronto, an internationally renowned school offering a variety of thought-invoking classes. Make sure to check them out and use discount code ESS262 for 20% off your yearly tuition. Okay, let's get into it.
So, we're currently on Union Glacier in Antarctica. It's been about 3 days into our research trip, and so far it's truly a crazy experience, to which we'll dive into on today's podcast. And this is what our camp looks like. As you can see, there are nice looking glaciers behind us.
As you can tell, glaciers are made up of mainly ice and snow, which are part of the Earth's hydrosphere. The hydrosphere refers to all of the Earth's waters, including but not limited to the typical oceans and lakes. The frozen parts of the hydrosphere, like ice and snow, has a special term and is specifically referred to as the cryosphere.
So, Alan, what are glaciers?
Well, they are large masses of snow, ice, and sediment forming over many centuries. Actually, glaciers start out as simple clumps of snow, which accumulate and compress into very dense layers of glacial ice. As they travel across the continent, they also pick up sediments, which are incorporated as well. Glaciers can transport rocks around, which relates to the lithosphere. The lithosphere, otherwise known as the geosphere, refers to the solid Earth, including all the rock pieces contained inside glaciers.
Believe it or not, glaciers actually interact with the biosphere as well. When most people think of glaciers, they think it's a lifeless wasteland, but that's not the case. Within the biosphere, the majority of life is actually just invisible to the human eye in the form of microbes, which, as you might expect, is present on glaciers as well. Algae, bacteria, and viruses all thrive in glacier ecosystems, and it should come at no surprise, really, that where there's water, there's life. Millions of microbes can live in the top 2 meters of the glacier, as well as on the surface of the glacier in the superglacial ecosystem.
So, this picture shows just how much life is actually invisible in a glacial ecosystem. The little holes everywhere are the cryogenites, and they're basically pockets of microbes in the ice that form sheltered microbial communities.
Despite being exposed to the elements, microbes are also found on the glacial surface. If we took some of the glacial snow and melted it, this is what we'd see. Here's a picture of some glacial meltwater that has been dyed with a fluorescent stain. The larger blobs are bacteria, and the tiny dots are viruses.
I still think that the coolest thing we've seen so far is watermelon snow. Not only is it pink, it actually smells like watermelons. This is thanks to the algae Chlamydomonas nivalis, which has a high concentration of carotenoids, which gives it its pink hue. This algae blooms on the surface of wet glaciers in spring, but it is actually quite detrimental to the glacier itself. It plays a large role in decreasing the albedo effect, resulting in higher melt rates of the glacier.
Well, I'm sure our listeners already know about the albedo effect, which we've talked about previously during our podcast on Earth systems. But as a refresher, albedo is the ability for a surface to reflect the sun's radiation. So the higher the albedo, the higher the reflectivity.
And no matter how good it smells and looks, I wouldn't recommend eating the pink snow, as you'll probably get digestive problems. Unfortunately, some of our colleagues learned this the hard way.
It was truly amazing how we were introduced to the life that could live inside of glaciers. These microbes were most likely transported from nearby ecosystems via the wind or water, and were compacted into glaciers and formed their communities within the ice over centuries. The microbes that lived within the glacial ecosystems are part of inglacial ecosystems, and it is the largest habitat of the 3 glacial ecosystems.
The inglacial ecosystem hosts a variety of microbes. These microbes can either thrive through photosynthesis or by taking chemicals from rocks that were previously trapped in the ice.
The other day, we even got to explore some caves underneath the glaciers. One of the scientists we met, Jane Doe from the University of Toronto, was there for research. She was looking for life under the glaciers. And yes, surprisingly, there can be life underneath glaciers. These microbes can live in cold conditions and additionally survive without any oxygen or sunlight.
The microbes which live just out of reach of the sun's radiation mainly survive off of water and the nutrients released by the chemical weathering of rock. The presence can increase this erosion of essential elements like carbon, sulfur, and iron by up to an astounding 8 times. The kinds of organisms which survive down there are also known as chemolithotropes, which are organisms that consume the chemical compounds for energy.
In addition to chemical weathering of rocks, there is also physical weathering that provides the microbes nutrition. The glacier and the rocks underneath are pressing and grinding against each other to produce energy. This releases some chemicals to which the organisms can also consume.
Here's a word from today's second sponsor. Gateway Antarctica is a center for Antarctic studies and research at the University of Canterbury. Their goal is to enhance the understanding of Antarctica in the context of the global environment. They play a leading role in research projects held in Antarctica, and we would like to thank them for funding our trip to the Union Glacier.
Speaking of which, why do people even study glaciers? Aren't they just chunks of ice and snow?
Well, we actually met researcher Jack Frost, who told us that he is a glaciologist studying ice cores. And there's a photo of me and Jack. My favorite aspect of the trip so far was when he provided us the opportunity to help collect an ice core and showed us what was inside the ice. So ice cores are these cylinders of ice that are drilled out of a glacier. These cores can give us information on the past events that happened hundreds of years ago on Earth. So Alan, want to define glaciologists to the listeners?
Glaciologists, like Jack, are people who study ice and snow for a living, and they've been around since the 1900s. In the past, glaciologists used glacier melting patterns to track ice age patterns, but today they have a new purpose, measuring and predicting the rate of global warming. By tracking whether glaciers are growing or shrinking, combined with other metrics, scientists and glaciologists can track and predict changes in temperature and weather patterns.
That's right, Alan. Tracking of glacial size is incredibly important because they act as a major carbon sink. Atmospheric carbon is one of the major gases responsible for trapping heat in the Earth's atmosphere. As we mentioned earlier, the metabolic activity of microbes constantly interconverts organic carbon to CO2 and methane, which builds up in the pockets of air and ice. When the glacier melts, the carbon is released back into the atmosphere, essentially creating a positive feedback loop. Warmer temperatures cause the ice to melt, and the resulting ice that is melted releases more carbon, causes the temperature to increase even more.
In fact, there's actually another way glaciers impact the atmosphere and climate change. Surface deposits of carbon also contribute to the feedback loop. Snow and ice are some of the most important factors contributing to Earth's albedo. So when the surface is darkened by carbon deposits, the amount of sunlight reflected decreases, which further increases the rate of melting, which in turn increases the global temperature.
Glacial melting is also a major concern for sea levels. Because glacial ice is a land reservoir of water, any runoff from glaciers is also directly contributing to rising sea levels. You know what time it is. It's time for Joke of the Week. Last week's top voted joke in the comments was sent by Jake from State Farm. Thank you, Jake, for watching. And his joke is, what did one tectonic plate say when he bumped into the other? My fault.
That's a great joke, Jake. Wow, can you believe it's almost been 10 minutes? Well, that's all we have time for today. As always, feel free to leave any questions you might have in the comments below. Make sure to tune in next week, where we'll be taking a full 180, and we'll be discussing volcanoes with our special guest, the science guy himself, Bill Nye. Remember to subscribe and leave a review. See you next week.